And is renowned all over the world as a piece of architecture because of the kind of adobe buttresses which support the walls. And it was interesting to me that many times when a culture is assimilated, one culture is assimilated into another, there are traces of the previous culture that survive. And just as the Navajos would weave what they called an exit line in their blankets or their rugs, they would always have a little line that came out from the center of the design to the periphery of the piece, and it was to allow the spirit of the piece to escape so it wouldn't be trapped inside the rug or inside the blanket. And so this little line going out from the corner of the church is sort of a tip of the hand to the, or tip of the hat to the Indian culture that made the church. It's like a little spirit line that allows the spirit to escape.
This is Carl's painting of Mont Saint-Michel in France, and it has a wonderful quality about it because of the sky particularly. And many people have remarked on how they like the sky very much. It gives it sort of an ethereal look, and this is how the mount looks when you drive up to it. And Carl can tell you more about his feeling about it.
It's true that the land along the shoreline in that part of France is very flat and a host to a number of herds of sheep. And as you drive up to Mont Saint-Michel, it doesn't appear like it's in the water. Actually, it's an island, but there's so little in the way of distinguishing landmarks between the water and the land that you don't see the water until you're right up to the approaches to the island itself. It appears to be floating, as it were, on the land. But as you come closer, suddenly you realize that there's this tremendous gulf of water between the island and the mainland. And it's the site of some rather dramatic tides 50 feet high that sweep in all of a sudden and then sweep out with the same rapidity. And it gives the place a sort of a magical appearance and feeling when you're there. Grace has done many flower paintings, and I like all of them, but one that has a particular spot in my heart is this vase of flowers. I don't know exactly what it is that is so compelling to me, except that I think the simplicity of it, the utter simplicity where it's reduced to its most basic shapes, and then the brilliant colors playing against each other, give it a power that you don't usually find in flower paintings. Flower paintings are usually very ethereal and very soft and beautiful, but this has a certain power statement to make, and it's always been one of my favorites. Grace, what do you feel about that?
Well, that's exactly what I had in mind. This is out of my imagination, and it's mostly about light and dark. And I had the idea that the one side, for example, if it was near a window, the one side would be very bright, and the other side would be very dark. And so it's mostly about light and dark, and I particularly like the light on the vase. And it is very simple so that the light and the dark becomes the most important thing. This painting is called Fishing Boats, and I particularly like water, and I also like to do boats. And this group of fishing boats I found fascinating because it's something that you see if you go to Spain or Portugal, or actually it could be anywhere in a southern climate where the fishermen go out and then they come in midday and their boats are there, and they're usually a very interesting shape, and they're usually small, and they're very colorful sometimes. So they do make a nice picture and something memorable that you think about after you get home, and you think about the wonderful things that you saw, and there's something really nice and restful about thinking about a fishing fleet.
It's come in all kinds of shapes and forms, of course, and this one I found particularly fascinating because it's down on the west coast of Florida in sort of a dune area, and it has this awkward up on stilts kind of a look that is very unusual for a lighthouse. We think of them usually as being towers, and this one is literally a house with a light on top. And it has this top-heavy look because it sits up on these stilts, I'm sure to protect it from hurricane surges when the waters rise. It sits all by itself, and it has a personality that it projects, even though it's just a lot of lumber and shingles. And I can't tell you whether it's still in service or not, because the Coast Guard has been decommissioning a lot of these. But before this one blows away someday or is disassembled by the Guard, I thought it would be nice to record it. Up on Montmartre Hill is a place called Place du Tertre, which is a mecca for tourists. Of course, it's thronged with people and with current-day artists willing to do portraits or sell their scenes of Montmartre. The thing that fascinates me about this area is that even though it's thronged with current people, the buildings and the churches and the structures there were just about the same as they are today back in the days of the Impressionists and the many painters who made this part of Paris famous. Besides its bustling crowds are these mute testimonies to the Impressionists of almost 100 years ago. Light changes from time to time during the year, and you hear of painters talking about the light in certain parts of a country. Perhaps you don't become as aware of that as when you do sit down to do a painting yourself. This painting is depicted in Paris in the fall when the sun is lower than usual and the shadows lengthen and there's a crispness in the air and the colors are beginning to be enriched by the turning leaves of the trees. And even though there's a chill in the air and the flower monger has to turn his coat collar up, he's still there with a big, beautiful bunch of flowers to sell to anyone who's interested. There's a certain bustle to Paris. Women in Chanel coats still walk by with a loaf of French bread under their arms, going home for a lunch break or for an early supper. This scene also depicts an Art Deco subway entrance. There are a few of these left in Paris, and they too hark back to an earlier day when Art Deco was the rage in Paris. As I say, there are only a few of them left, and they are monuments to a more decorative age. That we're both painters and we're married. Sometimes I make a joke about not stepping into each other's turf and say it must be working because we're still married. But we do come to this from two different directions. And I think it's interesting that you have one flavor to your paintings, and because you've come at it from an entirely different direction than I come to painting.
Before I began to do acrylics several years ago, I was doing watercolors for a long time, and I think that that's a part of what I bring to the acrylics. It's a little perhaps a little looser look than you have, and sometimes it's from my imagination, and sometimes the painting unfolds as I do it. I put something down and it kind of evolves as I go along, and this is kind of an example of that. It is birch trees, and I do love birch trees. We have a lot of them around our house and of course in this area. And yet I look at this as almost an abstract. If you look at the background colors, they're really almost more important than the birch trees. And it almost has a stained glass look. And the background isn't terribly specific, but it's more colors and shapes. And so sometimes my painting goes off in that direction.
And it's a lot more interpretive than things that I'm doing at the moment. You know, I think there are many valid ways of painting. We each have our preferences, of course. I tend to like to report things that I've seen that I feel are beautiful or interesting. And to that extent, I become a little more detailed in what I've seen and put down on the paper. Because I want to share with other people what I think is pretty. You, on the other hand, are able to find impressions in something that you've enjoyed and convey the impression rather than the detail. I admire that, and I would like to work more toward that in some of my work, because I think there's a value in each school, but I think they can benefit from from what they learn from each other.
Yes, but I admire so much what you do, and I feel that I could never do it because